There's an old saying that the former Chief Justice of Western Australia used to say that a pinch of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And what he meant by that was you can say, for example, somebody walks into this boardroom and says, I'm in a shareholder dispute. I'm a shareholder in this company. I'm in a dispute with the other shareholder. One of the questions I would firstly ask them is, did you have a shareholders agreement when you established the company, which is sort of a rule book for when a dispute might arise?
Hello, and welcome to the Market Bull Podcast. Please note, topics and stocks discussed in this podcast are not financial or investment advice. Aaron McDonald is the founder and managing director at Pragma Lawyers, located in Perth, Western Australia. Aaron spoke about his journey and why he founded Pragma Lawyers nearly 10 years ago after seeing an opportunity in the market. He talked about the different sectors of the profession and how they have evolved over the years. He also helped highlight the intersection where legal advice meets investors of any scale. We also talked about the impact of new technologies such as artificial intelligence and blockchain on the industry. He also spoke about some of the opportunities he sees emerging in the profession. Here is Aaron McDonald.
So hello, I'm Ben Kostrich and this is the Market Bull Podcast. Joining me today on the show, I'm actually at his offices, is Aaron McDonald, the founder and managing director of Pragma Lawyers. It's a great building. We were just talking about some of the history and how they've been growing rapidly and therefore have had to move into this new space. But welcome to the show, Aaron.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you for having me.
When we caught up last week, we sort of talked about, again, because a lot of what I talk about is listed companies and directors of that field, especially in mining or biotech, and looking at those other aspects that investors naturally should be considering and thinking about. And, you know, I spoke with Paz Princey about tax and of course now yourself, we're going to be diving into law specifics and everything regarding that from, well, yeah, an investing point of view, but just having structures, which I think is very valuable for businesses and investors alike. Yeah, sure. But talking through your history, you could say you're the traditional sort of graduated law and then went and worked at one of the sort of big four sort of premises and then migrated away. But without me saying your story, what is your history and how have you managed to get to where you are now?
Well, I'm Subiaco born and bred, so we're in Subi now. I grew up a couple of blocks that way. Was born at the end of the street and obviously went to UWA, did my law degree there, eventually did my master's there as well, and then graduated, worked in a small commercial law firm on the terrace, on St. George's Terrace. My old man as a kid had an accountancy practice about a block that way from where we're sitting now. And he's always been quite entrepreneurial, and so I think that rubbed off on me a little bit.
Naturally.
And then, as you often do in sort of your mid-20s and you've recently got your degree, is I really wanted to work in the big law firm, the ones that you see on TV. And so that's really the push as to why I moved into one of the large international law firms. I was there for 6 years, and I worked predominantly in dispute resolution and litigation there. Then when I was about 29, I set up Pragma, and it's now been running 9 years and 10 months. And so we're sort of about to turn 10 in January. So it's been going, it's grown quite a lot in that time.
And as we said, when I was looking at your history, you almost saw an opportunity to address, well, I guess, part of the legal market that wasn't being serviced. Or going through your mind, as you said, 10 years ago to where you are now, I mean, what was the driving force behind it? A little bit from your dad as an entrepreneur, but where was the gap in the market to chase?
I mean, lawyers get, everybody knows a good lawyer joke, and lawyers get a bad rap, about charging in 6-minute units and the like. And really the genesis of the creation of the firm, and still is part of our ethos, is trying to get, as the name suggests, pragmatic solutions for our clients. So what that might mean in the terms of a dispute might be trying to, if you accept that 97% of disputes resolved by consensus, which is the statistic, then trying to get to those consensuses or some form of resolution more quickly, and also trying to do it more cost effectively. The other thing that we sort of revolutionized was charging in what we called outcomes-based pricing or fixed fees, because people walk into a law firm, they're terrified about how much it's going to cost them. And so if you can actually provide the client with some certainty around that, I mean, traditionally what lawyers do and what we do to some extent is we charge in 6-minute units like most other law firms, but it creates this conflict between the client's interests and the law firm's interests. And by charging or proposing a fixed price to do something, the interests are completely aligned. So that's something that we've done quite a lot, and it's been received really well from the market. And we found that a lot of people have come from the big end of town to our firm to try and experience something different. And when they've come, they've stayed, fortunately. So that's the way it's sort of gone for us.
Yeah, the pragmatic approach, I think, it's hard to sort of think about what it was like 10 years ago, especially for me, for example. But, I'm hearing that echoed through a lot of conversations, a lot of people, is that because the old way of doing things and the traditional ways that a lot of these bigger companies were doing was just not what people wanted.
We're no orphan either. Like, if you look at the last 10 years, there's been the proliferation of law firms. There's been so many that have come out, particularly, younger people who've had that big law firm training and have gone out and said, listen, I can do this for myself. And I think there's a better way of doing things. So it's pretty common.
And you said just then about, I guess, lawyers having a reputation, and everyone's got a funny joke. But my sister is studying law, and I think she's going to be a sensational lawyer in the future. But I can imagine there's a lot of myths and misrepresentations of what lawyers actually do, and even the whole system. I think it's terrible to say, but suits, and you sort of envision that's how lawyers act and behave and how things are done. And I know that's Hollywood and probably a disservice to lawyers. But when you're looking at what law is, and I guess some of the miscommunications and misrepresentations of that art form, if I can call it that, what jumps to mind, and what have you sort of noticed you've had to almost dispel?
Well, I'm a big fan of Suits.
Great show.
Up until about season 5, where I think it sort of went off a cliff. But obviously that's all sort of running into court and doing urgent applications and hearings. And there is aspects of that certainly in what I've done, and I have done that sort of stuff. But it's definitely the exception and not the rule. Most of the time it's actually picking up the phone, speaking with other lawyers on the phone to try and advance your client's interest, or to try and negotiate an outcome or a transaction or a settlement of a dispute, and just trying to help your clients achieve their goals. So a lot of it's actually spent inside the office. Obviously in 2023, you can pretty much carry on a business like ours from anywhere at the moment. A lot of court hearings you can do remotely as well. So I would say that it's less exciting than Suits, but it's still equally rewarding and enjoyable.
And given my listening base is all investment driven, and they're looking at, I guess, investment strategies, and I'm thinking of parallels between, or the crossways between, where legal sort of services intersect with investment strategies, if it's for stocks, but I can imagine more so in real estate and some of the other sorts of business disputes. But when you're looking at that, where the sort of segues and I guess crossroads emerge between those two sections?
There's an old saying that the former Chief Justice of Western Australia used to say, that a pinch of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And what he meant by that was, you can say, for example, somebody walks into this boardroom and says, I'm in a shareholder dispute. I'm a shareholder in this company. I'm in a dispute with the other shareholder. One of the questions I would firstly ask them is, did you have a shareholders agreement when you established the company, which is sort of a rule book for when a dispute might arise? And to set something like that up and to go to a lawyer, you might spend a few $1,000s to get that set up. But what if you don't have a document like that set up, and then you get into a dispute and you have to commence legal proceedings? It'll cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars. So what I'm trying to say is, by front-ending the expense on engaging a lawyer and getting somebody on early and building the structures correctly, not dissimilar to what Pasquale was saying on your podcast the other day, I think is money well spent. And it's actually beginning as you intend to end, if that makes sense.
But even having the foresight and understanding, I can say, sitting here, I have a very limited understanding of legal systems and how it all works. And for many, it'd be almost, where do you even start? Where do you even think about approaching this? And that's where I'm trying to sort of think is, how do they come to you and, I guess, start those conversations?
Well, a lot of the clients come to us through word of mouth and potentially other lawyers and other specialties. It's a bit like going to see a doctor, if you've got a specific issue, you want to see a specialist in that particular area. And that's the same with law. I mean, I don't know any lawyers that hold themselves out as generalists and do every single area of law well: migration, family, crime, civil litigation. The law is evolving and changing so rapidly all the time. To try and stay abreast of all of those changes is, impossible in my view. What you want is somebody who's practically minded and a specialist in their area, and you can work that out pretty quickly. I mean, most lawyers are members of if you didn't know where to start, most lawyers are members of the Law Society of Western Australia. You call them up and ask for a referral. I've got an issue. I need a family lawyer. I've got a commercial dispute or a dispute in a mining transaction. Can you refer me? So they'll look up their directory and they'll take you to somebody that does that sort of work. So I don't know if that answers your question.
A little bit. And that would be the point there about where have you found your niche and your specialties, given this firm and its size now, is where's that niche been for you?
So there's about 40 staff, 26 lawyers. And to be honest, there's lots of different lawyers with lots of different specialties. So we have a property team that does property transactions. We have an employment team that does employment disputes between employers and employees. We have an insolvency team and dispute resolution team, which is probably the largest part of the firm. That's about 50 to 60% of the firm. We have other lawyers that focus on commercial transactions and mining related transactions. So it's horses for courses, but really what we're known for, I think, is really a more pragmatic way of avoiding and resolving disputes.
Interesting. And has that shifted and changed over the 10 years that you've done it as well?
Like for example, like an employment matter, my business partner Libby is the head of that area. Now, I wouldn't profess to ever have taken that work on prior to her joining the firm, because she's a specialist in that area. She was trained at one of the big firms working in that area. So she's obviously got the competency to do that, whereas I don't.
Interesting. And you summarized there before with that quote, and I'm not going to repeat it because I know I'm going to butcher it and I'll have to listen to it back, but talking about the importance of approaching this before it gets costly, and the idea of having the right sort of foundations and some of the right structures in place before you get to that sticky situation where you suddenly have this urgency. And then that's when I guess lawyers would almost have that reputation of that hourly rate, because there'd be so much work and you almost have to do it. But how would you, I guess, encapsulate some of those if you're, I guess, focusing on investment and setting up structures in there, if it's a company? I mean, what would be some of the, I guess, key pieces that you would want to be having or even considering and speaking with you about?
Well, the example I used before, a shareholders agreement, is a pretty important one. So if you're setting up any enterprise with another person, you're probably going to use a company to do that, a proprietary limited company. And so setting up a shareholders agreement, which basically it's like a partnership agreement really, but for the company, that would be an obvious one.
Yeah. Constitutions
of companies, they normally come, you don't need a lawyer to draft one. You can buy them online now for a fixed fee. That's pretty simple. And it's sort of like what's the rules for calling a meeting? What's the rules in terms of voting and proxies and when annual general meetings are called, those sorts of things. The other things, if you're starting up a business, you want, rigorous policies for your staff and employment agreements, anything that sort of governs a relationship between yourself and another person, whether it's any sort of stakeholder like a customer or a client, terms and conditions that relate to those sorts of things, whether you're taking security interests in particular pieces of property, that needs to be documented really carefully. So yeah, if you're unsure, I guess my advice is just to try and have a lawyer on speed dial that's sort of like a trusted advisor. Something you just pick up the phone and just have a 2-minute call. I'm thinking of doing this. What do you think?
Yeah.
What should I consider?
Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing, because even I can imagine a lot of young adults or even adults period would be going into these territories where it's too hard and almost putting themselves in a disadvantage by not considering or even reaching out to begin with.
100%. And you'd be amazed at how large some of these businesses get without, particularly in mining, these contractors they're dealing with huge numbers and they don't have the structures and rigorous guidelines and policies around their business that you would expect with a business of that size, because they've just grown so quickly and they've just just taken off.
Yeah, and I mean, is that another point? Is there ever too late a time to start doing this stuff?
No,
I mean, it
absolutely
just
not.
might get more costly the closer it gets to some sort of difficult conversations. But
Yeah, I think that's true. I think, yeah, it's always got to be better doing it sooner rather than later. Yeah.
and another point that you could say it's almost related to myself watching technology grow, and I haven't raised it with you before, but like, artificial intelligence and a lot of the new technologies I was just saying before about blockchain and some of those applications, and say a lot of noise. And of course, I always like to speak to someone that's in the industry and knows what's happening and how it's impacting the industry. And I think AI and blockchain are probably very different because they've both got slightly different implications. And I know artificial intelligence is generating a lot of conversation, but how do you see some of those technologies impacting, legal practices? And I mean, what are the instant sorts of, thought process going through your mind when these are coming at such rapid rates?
To be honest, it doesn't really enter my mind. Like I've looked into it quite a lot. Amongst the lawyers, Ben, there's been such a talk about not so much AI, but sort of also blockchain, but just sort of the rapid evolution of things like AI taking over the role of a lawyer.
But, sort of taking out entire sectors of the market and taking away their jobs.
In many ways, I hope they do, but give me something else to do. But what I find is that the talk is the theory is very different to the practice. The leading authority actually on this topic in the world is a professor over in London named Professor Richard Susskind. He's written a book about it, and basically his theory is, the transactional stuff. So setting up, and you can already see it at the moment with some of the websites online, getting an employment agreement or a shareholders agreement, or those basic documents I was just referring to.
Yeah.
That's sort of the lawyer, the legal expertise that you need a human being to actually apply to do that stuff is sort of almost on the way out already. And you can even see accountants at the moment, they're already offering this stuff. They're not lawyers, and they're offering this stuff to their clients because they can buy it off the shelf, off a website, and pay a fee for it. But that stuff is the stuff that's going to go first. The more where you need an advocate representing or advancing your interests on your behalf, like in a dispute where it's factually, the facts are unique to that particular event, then it's going to be less likely that you're going to have AI involved. I've played around with ChatGPT.
Pretty hustling, yeah.
And I've been amazed at I've actually been really impressed at how it is. I asked it to draft a theoretical letter the other day just to see what it would spit out. And actually, I thought the quality of the work was actually not too bad, but I think it's a sort of I wouldn't recommend it. And I certainly couldn't stand here and recommend any of your listeners to say go out and use it in lieu of using a lawyer, because you also hear of these horror stories of lawyers using it and asking it to generate cases. And then, I don't know if you heard this story, but I think one of the lawyers was using it to prepare a document for court, and it referenced these cases that didn't exist. So it sort of like created its own cases.
Yeah. No, I've experimented with that by just even asking itself who is Ben Kostrich, and it will make up a fabricated story. But unless you actually knew about it, you just take it with and be like, it's factual. Like, it's just information.
Yeah. So I think there's that risk, which I think is I'm not there on the daily. I haven't spent much time on it.
Interesting. And are there any other, I guess, evolutions within law practicing? And given, I always flash back to the pandemic, which feels like a while ago now, given how quickly people have sort of forgotten, and there's other things that are pressing on people's minds. But a lot of what was meant to happen over a few years was just instantly acted upon overnight with adaptations of technology and working from home. And I guess the globalization connectivity just went astronomical. But I wonder how that fits into legal frameworks, almost from, do lawyers have that ability to, work internationally or globally, or what's the sorts of, I guess, foundations to allow them to work in different jurisdictions or stop them? Or how do you guys, I guess, operate around the world? Or is Pragma focused purely on WA or just Australia?
Yeah, so we're only allowed to practice law within Australia. We wouldn't hold ourselves out as practicing law in a different jurisdiction. And of course, we wouldn't. We would use a partnering firm in those jurisdictions, and have done in the past for that sort of stuff. And likewise, law firms from overseas engage us to do things which are local to Australia. What's happened during the pandemic is the acceptability of doing things like Teams and Zoom to conduct meetings and court hearings. I mean,
That's fascinates me. Just thinking of that.
I've been in this room appearing in the federal court looking at judges on these screens. And I think the court's preference is obviously to have people within the court, but it actually, in my view, saves the clients considerable amounts in legal fees, because you don't having a lawyer travel down to court and charge for all of that time. You're really just sort of just there for the time that you need to be. And it really promoted an efficiency. We saw with the Parliament passing all of these laws overnight that would otherwise take, particularly changes to workplace laws, overnight that would otherwise take years or months to get through the Parliament. So it's amazing what things can happen when there's pressure on them to make a decision. So I thought it was interesting in that respect. We have heaps of Zoom and Teams calls. I'm sure you do, with lots of people around the world, and it's just sort of an accepted practice now.
Yeah. Is it swinging back the other way? Like, there's an urgency, I know, with some professions, that now it's almost you have to be in off, or you have to be in those face-to-face scenarios, which I think is never really going to be a full 100% swing. But is a legal profession now pretty adept at being, maybe 50% of these?
I read a lot about this stuff. We've got a policy at this firm that you're expected to work from the office 3 out of the 5 days a week, so you can work from home 2 days a week and pick whatever it suits you. But most people don't take it up. I try to work 1 day a week from home. And when I do, I find it's a lot better for that longer, sort of quieter thinking time that you need, rather than you don't want interruptions, which I think is always really good. And but otherwise, I read articles about the big firms and the banks insisting that people come back into the office, but I don't know whether the science stacks up in terms of productivity and that actually occurring.
Yeah, I was thinking more as well from like a client's point of view. Is there more of a, instead of initially a first consult here, it's a Teams call and stuff like that. And in court, is that still also sort of a 50-50? I mean, what are the sorts of percentages in regards to how things are sorted these days?
No, so like I'm very happy to do an initial consultation with somebody over Teams or Zoom if they can't get in. I'd always prefer to do it in person. And the same with court. Like I could probably arrange to attend court via Teams, but I'd have to probably have a reason as to why I'm not there. And so it's the exception, not the rule.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And I mean, given your growth, as we said, 18 months, you're in this fantastic new building, and I've only just seen the boardroom, but you're growing at an exponential rate. I mean, what has been triggering this growth? You said at the beginning, a lot of people moving away from the big four and some of the traditional law firms. But I mean, what is driving this growth so exponentially? And is it a certain sector of the market that's driving this? Is it mining potentially, or where's all the sort of demand coming from?
I think it's just all about relationships. Like, people want to use a lawyer that they have a relationship with, or that they know and that they trust. And then my view of it is, I think the big law firms do their job very well, and there are obviously some exceptional lawyers there. But I think that people are going to pick up the phone, and businesses are going to pick up the phone with a lawyer that fits the issue that they're having and is going to be cost effective and is going to help them. And I think that the proliferation of law firms, given that there's so many of them now, there's so much to choose from, and it's so competitive, Ben. I mean, you're trying to win work over your competitors every day of the week, because everybody's trying to win the best work from the best clients. Clients are really sport for choice, in my view, to get somebody who's a specialist who's going to look after them on fees and do something in a timely and cost-effective way.
Interesting. So it's quite a sort of, I mean, I'm picturing sort of like a jungle-esque of everyone competing against each other, but then also when it comes to doing the actual work and negotiating with people from other sides, I mean, how do those all conversations go? And I mean, I can imagine in your point of view, you have to remove all emotion from anything. It's all the facts of law, but having all this sort of competition in there, sort of, do you have a target on your back? I mean, what is the sorts of
not really.
vibes? No,
it's, I mean, particularly in Perth, like the
too small.
The legal profession in Perth is like a very parochial, collegiate profession where everybody knows everybody, and you can the good lawyers, in my view, use the telephone really well, and they pick up the phone a lot to their opponents, and really they do take the emotion out of it, because sometimes your clients can't do that and they're too emotional.
Well, that's the point of getting a lawyer in there, to the black and white sort of law.
Yeah, and I think that's in everybody's interest when that happens. And when the lawyers start talking to each other, usually you can see, you both know how it's going to work out if it's if you don't resolve it, or what the outcomes are for each of your clients. So there's an incentive for both parties to try and work things out, and that's usually what occurs. I found with sort of Eastern States lawyers, they write your letters as though you're like, you're from a one street town, and it's this hyper aggression. I've discussed this with eminent QCs and stuff, and they've agreed with me on this, that the Sydney lawyers write letters that have a tone which no Perth lawyer would ever write. Interesting. Yeah, and I've always found that odd, but my hypothesis is that they do that because Sydney's a proper international city, and lawyers send letters to other lawyers knowing, I'm never going to see this person in the street. Interesting. Whereas, that would never happen in Perth.
Yeah. Well, because I just think of that again as, it's like I don't know, tone is always perceived differently in a letter, but a harshly written letter is sort of, from some points of view, quite intimidating as well.
I think the irony of the whole situation is that writing sort of aggressive letters, certainly that is not the way this firm operates at all. And I think there are a few law firms that do operate like that, but it's actually, in my experience, counterintuitive to your client's interests, because what you're trying to do is you're trying to persuade the reader to agree to your point of view, and you're never going to do that by being aggressive. Yeah. It reminds me of a line by the late Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who was a US Supreme Court judge. She said, reacting in anger or annoyance does not advance one's ability to persuade. So, and if you always just keep that in mind and just stick to the facts, you're always going to be more persuasive. And that's really what lawyering is, trying to be persuasive.
And I mean, this is going to sound a bit interesting. Like, you're talking about a physical letter being sent in the post, for example. That's like, there's some of the traditional things and ways that letters have to be communicated, because that's where I'm sort of thinking it's, when you're looking at how law is going to evolve, are there principles that you believe just won't be touched? Like, again, I'm going to pull, like, serving someone, you have to physically give them things. I mean, is there any ways in which you can see this being threatened or challenged or disrupted as technology evolves and changes? And
I've got no doubt that in the next 10 years, our concept of serving somebody personally will have completely disappeared. I mean, it still happens.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
When you commence a legal proceeding and you have to serve somebody personally, that is still a requirement, and there's rules around how you serve somebody if they're willing to accept the document or not. I mean, not dissimilar to now with, if you want to be a director of any Australian company now, you need a unique director ID number. And so I can sort of see a world where everybody has one of these ID numbers, and then you can sort of have some universal way of being able to send formal communications to them. So that's the way I imagine those sorts of things will end up, because service is just such an antiquated thing that's been going on for hundreds of years.
And I mean, the legal structures, you're dealing with, again, this is the naivety of me, it's WA and then federal. I mean, what are the sort of links, or how do you operate within a lot of the legal foundations, and how do they operate? Like, is legal somehow more powerful than federal, or is federal overall? I mean, what are the sorts of, how do they sort of coexist?
So I think it's 128 of the Australian Constitution provides that a Commonwealth law, so a law made by the Parliament in Canberra, to the extent of any inconsistency with a law made by the Parliament here in Western Australia or any state law, the Commonwealth law will override the state law. And then Section 51 of the Constitution sets out all of these areas where the Commonwealth has the power to create laws. So taxation or commerce between the states, those sorts of things, the Commonwealth Parliament will be able to make laws in relation to, and whatever's left over is really left for the states. So the main game's really in Canberra, in my view. That's where all the main federal laws are made. So anything to do with corporations is a creature of Commonwealth statute. Anything to do with work health and safety, that's a state-based legislation. What else? Anything to do with sort of trade and commerce is Commonwealth. And as a lawyer, you get to know what areas of law are going to be based upon what pieces of legislation, and also court-made law as well, so the common law.
And are these quite stagnant in regards that, the letter of the law has been set? I mean, do these things have sort of updates come to them quite frequently? I mean, again, I've spoken with a lot of different sort of sectors of the market where changes are almost happening quite instantaneously, but I can imagine that there's definitely some.
Yes, yes and no. Certain parts of the law are rapidly changing, like as you've seen recently with cultural heritage and mining. I mean, they introduced new laws around Indigenous cultural heritage, and they introduced new act, and then they reversed it, and now they've introduced a new piece of legislation to bring it back to the old system. So laws are always constantly changing, and you've got to try and stay up to date with it as a lawyer in order to be able to add value to your clients and properly advise them.
Interesting. And do you think that, given the proactive nature of you guys, how are you again staying on top of all this? There's a lot of changes, but where are you seeing, I guess, the opportunities emerge? Is it, is it overarching? As I said, is it sector specific, or where does the real sorts of opportunities start to emerge within the legal profession? Looking at so many kids that are studying it now, wanting to come through, or hypothetically, I've seen a video online saying that law's done because AI can do it, and then they don't want to pursue it. Where are the opportunities emerging?
I don't know. I'm probably the wrong person to ask that question. I think there's heaps of. I think Perth's a huge opportunity, to be honest. I think Perth's just absolutely booming. And if you ask me, the whole town revolves around mining in this town, or sort of industries that fall off mining. And so I think Perth's a terrific place to be, particularly at this time. And I think the next 10 to 20 years is going to be a very good time for business generally in this state. So I think there's heaps of opportunities as long as you're sort of a specialist, as I indicated earlier, and you get a reputation as the person to go to for that particular issue. People are always going to find you. And I see that with some of my competitors. They're very well known in a particular area, and therefore, even when things are quiet, they're still getting phone calls and getting engaged by clients to do work.
And given that it's an ever evolving market, and you guys are growing quite quickly. Where do you find your time off, if there is any? How do you balance such a intense lifestyle that, as you said, you've probably got to have your phone on 24 hours a day, answering clients and I guess growing this? How have you managed to, or how do you manage all this? And I guess quite highly stressful given some of the discussions and the clients and the things that you're having to resolve. How do you manage it all?
Yeah, everybody's different in answer to that question, but the way I've sort of set up my own life is I'm a morning person, so I like to get up early. We've got a gym out the back here of this firm.
Nice.
So I sometimes be there 5 a.m. in the morning, and I've also got a gym in my garage at home as well. So
we talked about that last week.
I was there at 5 a.m. this morning with ice baths and saunas and stuff like that. As you can see, the theory versus the practice is a little bit different. But
being pragmatic though.
Yeah. So but getting there, and like I like to get into the office early, seize the day in the morning, and then I do sort of work a little bit in the evening as well. And I keep Saturdays completely to myself, and then Sundays I sort of work. So I'm sort of a 6-day.
Yeah, kickstart your work week on a Sunday.
Yeah, I sort of treat that a bit like a Monday, try and get on top of things. Particularly with such a large team, it's important to make sure that sort of things are sort of pointing in the right direction to work on Monday. So that's really the system that works for me. But I know other lawyers. I've got friends that run law firms, and they do the absolute opposite. They get up late, but they'll send me emails at 2 a.m. and they do lots of other things. I go to Rottnest quite a lot, so that's sort of like my happy place.
Yeah.
Try and de-stress. But coming back to the sort of the genesis of the question, something that I have worked out the older that I've got is that looking after yourself and trying to take some time out is actually, not only is it important for yourself, but it's actually required in order to do your job properly. Like if you're feeling stale, or you're not thinking straight, or you're not the best version of yourself, then how can you be expected to give good or sound advice to your clients? It's a little bit like that saying they say to you on the airplanes, put your own oxygen mask on before trying and assist others.
Yeah.
Well, it's not dissimilar to that. Like you really need to have to be organised, really well organised, on top of your game. on top of yourself personally in order to be able to do this job.
Yeah, I can hear my dad in my ear as we speak. He might even be listening when this goes up, saying this exact thing, preaching the choir of taking care of your own self with such simple things, eating, drinking, exercise, and just like the simple things that you sort of almost get cooped up in an office and you don't approach them. But if we're swinging back to, again, the idea of when do you approach a lawyer, and when do you start considering these services from a potentially from a business orientated aspect, or even when does an individual start sort of approaching these issues and sort of trying to be a proactive, pragmatic approach? I mean, when do you really start saying that people should consider speaking with a lawyer, or again, as you said, just meeting someone at a pub, getting their mobile and just give them a call and hope, touch wood, that they don't send you a bill for the contacts that you've made?
I think you've got to align yourself up with a sort of a group of trusted advisors. Get a good accountant, something like Pasquale, a good lawyer around you, and then sort of when incidences arise or you think maybe I should just run that past somebody, particularly if you're getting into you're investing money in something or you're entering into a business relationship with somebody else, I think that's probably the first port of call. Or you're acquiring a business or you're selling a business or something like that where it's going to have a financial impact on you, then that's obviously, there's no harm in asking the question, even if you're being unduly conservative and the lawyer tells you you've got nothing to worry about. You'll never regret asking the question. So, those are my thoughts.
Is there a barrier though? Like, I mean, when I was speaking with Paz in particular, talking about the misconceptions, you'd almost associate your first interaction with a lot of these key representatives when you hit a certain threshold of income, for example, or the idea that it's a certain demographic, the plus 30s that only start considering this. It's people that are young and free and don't really have any sorts of inclinations to worry about this. I mean, do you see a spread of that, or is it mostly again the older demographic, or is it now the more so younger, hungrier sort of age group? Probably can call myself in that sort of range that's looking at doing this stuff.
Well, I'm 39, and a lot of the guys that contact me and my clients are sort of within sort of a plus or minus 10-year age bracket to me. That's probably because of who I am and the people that I know. But I don't think that's should be taken as a guide or anything like that. I mean, I think just dispelling the myth about sort of not wanting to speak to a lawyer or meet with a lawyer or finding that a daunting experience, I think is really not something that should be adopted, because I mean, I get phone calls here all the time from people who may or may not know me or been asked to call me about something, and I will often speak to them, and generally do speak to them and sort of give them at least a few early pointers, and it's totally off the clock. I would never charge them for that. They would never expect to be charged for that. So I think it's just sort of just getting somebody that you're comfortable with and that sort of is a good fit for you.
Yeah, the first impressions last, and that's where I'm relishing these opportunities to have these conversations, because it's coming from a perspective of myself, whereas I know a lot of listeners are a full range of ages, but how do you start considering, and the idea that it's never too late is a good one, but it's like setting up the structures early or having those conversations early so that when you do get to that potential road, that you can speak to someone that you said trust, which I think is a pillar of what people want to do, is work with people they trust. And I mean, we've encapsulated a lot about, I guess, some of the aspects of law, I think, and I'm looking forward to listening to it back and sort of picking it apart and thriving in it. But I mean, Pragma Lawyers, you're located in Subiaco, and you mentioned at the outset a lot of different services that you offer and the team that you've got and the specialization. But I mean, if people are looking to, I guess, get in contact with yourself foremost and the team, I mean, where can they go? And I mean, what do you sort of preach to people when they do contact you?
Well, we've got a website. Just Google Pragma or Pragma.law. You can call me directly, 61883340 if you want to contact me, or hit me up on LinkedIn or something like that if you want to. I mean, I'm very receptive to responding to questions that people ask me on that medium. I've forgotten the rest of the question.
Well, I think just more so like when people reach out to you, and I mean, who are they speaking with besides yourself, and I mean, who else has been around you in the team? Which probably should have included in the beginning bit.
So there's 3 directors. So myself, Elizabeth McLean, who's a employment lawyer, and Nick Malone, who's a director as well, and he's a dispute resolution lawyer. But normally, one of our staff will obviously answer the phone, or if you send an email to us, one of the directors will read it. I mean, it often goes to one of us three to begin with. We don't want
to know what's coming in first and foremost.
Yeah. And then we'll sort of identify who's the best person to sort of respond to the query or meet with the client or give the person a call. And we're normally pretty nimble and responsive. We normally get back to people on that day. So, and we pride ourselves on that. It's a pretty young at heart team in there. Ben, I mentioned earlier, I'm 39, but sort of most of the team in there is younger than me. There's certainly some lawyers that are more experienced than me in there, but we sort of pride ourselves on that young at heart cultural value. And it's a little bit different to sort of, Suits isn't a good example. But,
I haven't planted that idea at the beginning, haven't I?
But, like the grey hair law firm, not that there's anything wrong with that, but that's just not who we are.
Okay. No, I appreciate it. And yeah, I think this has been a stepping stone into your world. And I think some of the services are there. And I mean, that's why, as I said, I'm thoroughly enjoying these conversations because I get to get a brief insight into what's happening and some of the theories. But if it's a final takeaway of, I think, where you see Pragma going, but more so just the industry and where it potentially could be heading. I mean, are there any sorts of final points that you'd say that you can see this profession heading towards?
Well, in terms of Pragma, we've had a huge amount of growth. We've gone from one person to 44 people in 9 years. And I think the next few years will be more growth. Not that we're really trying to, we've set, we want to employ this amount of people by this amount of time. That's not really what we're about. We want to get really good people in here that sort of fit with us strategically and culturally and build a really great place to work. In terms of the profession, I think here in Western Australia, clients are really spoilt for choice. And, there's so many great lawyers in this town that all have different specialties. And I think that, you're really spoilt for choice in terms of being able to get a cost-effective lawyer that's able to respond to your needs and help you achieve your goals. And I think it's really important to try and have somebody that you can have on speed dial one that you can call just from time to time if you've got an issue or you can really be pointed in the right direction. As for this AI wave and all that, I mean, I think it's interesting. I'm very intrigued as to where it'll go. I don't think it's going to change it's been glacial change so far in the last 20 years. I don't think it's going to change much in the next 10 to 20 years. Yeah. And in many ways, I hope it does, because it's going to be better for the consumer if, we can get some economies of scale or reduce the costs of having to engage a lawyer through that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I think that will be the next chat that I'm already thinking about for the future, is us just diving through a lot of the AI potential ramifications or potential opportunities, but that's a full other complete episode or hours on itself. But yeah, thank you so much, Aaron, for taking the time to speak with me on the show today.
Thank you, Ben.
Thanks for listening to the Market Bull podcast. If you enjoyed it, please make sure to like and subscribe. You can follow the Market Bull on our socials at Twitter and LinkedIn by searching The Market Bull. You can also subscribe to our newsletter on the website by visiting www.themarketbull.com.au.